Last night, your person opened up to their friends and said, "I'm finally ready to admit this. This is not a prophecy. It is a fictional, inspirational story meant to encourage hope, reflection, and faith." There are moments in life when the heart grows quiet enough to hear truths it has been avoiding. Last night, in this story, someone sat among trusted friends carrying a burden they had hidden for far too long. They smiled when everyone expected them to smile, laughed when the room grew cheerful, yet inside they knew they could no longer outrun what their heart had been trying to say. Finally, they took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm finally ready to admit this." The room became still. Not because anyone expected dramatic news, but because honest words always carry a different kind of weight. They admitted they had been pretending to have everything figured out. They admitted that fear had kept them silent. They admitted that the future they had imagined could never be built on half-truths. Whether this story reminds you of someone in your own life or simply reflects the universal longing for honesty, let it be a reminder that courage often begins with a single sentence spoken aloud. Perhaps the message for you today is not about waiting for another person to change. Perhaps it is about recognizing that truth has a way of finding its voice. Healing begins when someone chooses honesty over hiding, forgiveness over pride, and hope over fear. If you have been carrying questions about your future, remember this: you cannot control another person's heart, but you can guard your own with wisdom, patience, and grace. Love that is healthy grows through honesty, respect, and consistent actions, not through secrets or uncertainty. God often works quietly, shaping character before changing circumstances. Seasons of waiting are not always signs of rejection. Sometimes they are opportunities to become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than you were before. So today, choose peace instead of panic. Choose faith instead of fear. Let your heart remain open, but let it also remain grounded. The right conversations happen in their proper time, and genuine relationships are strengthened by truth rather than fantasy. May this fictional story remind you that every new beginning starts with one brave confession, one sincere prayer, and one decision to walk forward in hope. Whatever tomorrow brings, let your confidence rest not in rumors or imagined conversations, but in God's unchanging love, His wisdom, and His promise to guide those who seek Him with a sincere heart. I'd be happy to continue the fictional, inspirational story in the same style. The thought lingered long after the conversation ended. The words, "I'm finally ready to admit this," continued to echo through the silence because they were more than a confession. They were the beginning of a different path. Sometimes the greatest change does not arrive with applause or celebration. It arrives in a quiet moment when someone decides they can no longer hide from the truth. As this story unfolds, imagine that every character is learning the same lesson in different ways. Fear can delay honesty, but it cannot erase it forever. The heart has a remarkable way of returning to the places where it still longs for healing. Perhaps you have experienced seasons when you questioned whether your patience mattered. You may have wondered if every prayer disappeared into the silence or if every hopeful step was leading nowhere. Yet growth is often invisible before it becomes undeniable. Just as a seed develops beneath the soil long before anyone sees a green leaf, many of life's greatest changes begin where no one else can see them. In this story, the person who finally spoke the truth did not suddenly become fearless. Their hands still trembled. Their voice still hesitated. They still worried about how others might respond. But courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing honesty even when fear is still present. Their friends listened without interrupting. Some had suspected there was more beneath the surface. Others were surprised by the depth of emotion that had been hidden behind ordinary conversations. Yet no one mocked the confession. Instead, the room filled with understanding. Because nearly everyone carries a story they have struggled to tell, that is one of the beautiful realities of life. We often believe we are alone in our struggles until someone finds the strength to speak first. Honest conversations have a way of giving other people permission to be honest too. If there is a message to take from this fictional story, let it be this: never underestimate the power of truth spoken with humility. It has the ability to restore trust, rebuild hope, and open doors that fear kept closed. Faith also teaches us that every season has its purpose. There are seasons of planting, seasons of waiting, and seasons of harvest. Waiting can feel frustrating because we naturally want immediate answers. Yet God often uses the waiting to shape our character before He changes our circumstances. Wisdom grows in places where impatience once lived. Perhaps today is not about predicting tomorrow. Perhaps today is about becoming the kind of person who is ready for tomorrow. Every act of kindness, every quiet prayer, every choice to forgive, and every step taken in faith prepares the heart for whatever lies ahead. As dawn arrived in this story, the conversation from the night before had already begun to change something inside the one who spoke. Nothing around them looked different yet. The streets were the same. The sky was the same. The routine of the day continued as usual. But inwardly, something had shifted. The burden of pretending had become lighter because truth had finally replaced secrecy. Sometimes the biggest miracle is not that circumstances change overnight. Sometimes the miracle is that a person's heart begins to change first. So wherever you are today, remember that your worth is not measured by another person's approval. It is found in the dignity God has given every human being. Walk with hope, speak with integrity, and trust that the right things grow stronger over time. Let your future be built on truth, patience, and faith rather than fear or uncertainty. And as this story continues, one question remains unanswered. After finally admitting the truth, what choice will this person make next? That answer belongs to the chapters still waiting to be written. I'd be glad to continue the fictional, inspirational story. Morning arrived with an unusual sense of calm. The conversation from the previous night had ended hours ago, yet its impact remained. Honest words have a way of staying with us long after they are spoken. They become turning points, not because they instantly change the world around us, but because they begin changing the heart within us. The person in this story woke with a quiet realization. They could no longer return to the version of themselves that hid behind uncertainty. Speaking honestly had not answered every question, but it had removed the weight of pretending. For the first time in a long while, they felt the freedom that comes from choosing truth over fear. One friend remembered the conversation throughout the day and thought about how often people carry invisible burdens. Another reflected on how many opportunities for healing are missed simply because no one is willing to speak first. Each person left with a renewed appreciation for honesty, compassion, and the importance of listening without judgment. If this fictional story resonates with you, perhaps it is because everyone has moments when they wonder if their voice matters. There are times when silence feels safer than vulnerability. Yet lasting relationships, whether with family, friends, or someone special, are built not on perfect words but on sincere ones. Faith reminds us that God sees every hidden struggle, every quiet prayer, and every sincere desire to grow. Even when answers seem delayed, His wisdom is never absent. Seasons of waiting are not wasted when they are used to develop patience, humility, and trust. As the day continued, the person reflected on what had led them to that confession. It was not one dramatic event but many small moments that slowly revealed the truth. Kindness they had received but never acknowledged. Mistakes they had refused to confront. Opportunities they had almost missed because fear convinced them they were not ready. Growth often happens this way. It is rarely a single leap. More often, it is a series of faithful steps taken one day at a time. Perhaps your own journey looks similar. You may be waiting for clarity about the future or hoping for a relationship to become healthier and stronger. While no story can predict what tomorrow will bring, every person can choose the values that shape tomorrow: honesty instead of deception, patience instead of panic, forgiveness instead of bitterness, and hope instead of despair. These choices do not guarantee immediate results, but they build a life that can withstand difficult seasons. By evening, the memory of the previous night's conversation had become less about what was said and more about what it represented. It was proof that people can change. It was evidence that humility is stronger than pride and that sincere conversations often become the first step toward reconciliation. There is a quiet strength in admitting what is true. It does not erase every mistake or solve every problem, but it creates space for healing to begin. And healing, though sometimes slow, has a remarkable way of restoring what seemed beyond repair. So let this story be an encouragement rather than a prediction. Let it remind you that your future is not determined by fear, assumptions, or imagined conversations. Instead, it is shaped by the daily decisions you make to walk with integrity, to extend grace, and to trust God even when the path ahead is not fully visible. As another sunset approached, the person looked toward the horizon with a different perspective. They still had unanswered questions. They still faced uncertain days. Yet one thing had changed forever. They had discovered that peace begins the moment truth is welcomed instead of avoided, and somewhere beyond the horizon of this story, another chapter was quietly waiting, one that would reveal not extraordinary miracles, but the extraordinary power of faith, honesty, and hope lived out one day at a time. I'd be happy to continue the fictional, faith-inspired story. The days that followed did not unfold with dramatic signs or instant answers. Instead, they unfolded the way many meaningful seasons of life do, through ordinary moments that slowly revealed extraordinary lessons. The conversation from that night remained a quiet reminder that truth has a way of changing a person's direction long before anyone else notices. The one who had finally spoken honestly found themselves reflecting on every decision that had led to that moment. They realized that fear had once convinced them that silence would protect them. Yet silence had only made the burden heavier. The moment they chose honesty, they did not become perfect, but they became free to begin growing. Perhaps that is one of the greatest gifts God gives His children, not the promise of an effortless life, but the strength to walk through each season with wisdom, grace, and courage. If this story speaks to your heart, let it encourage you to focus on what you can build today rather than what you cannot control tomorrow. No one can force another person to change, to understand, or to respond a certain way. But every person can choose to become more patient, more compassionate, and more faithful. Throughout Scripture, we see that God often prepares hearts quietly. Great changes are frequently preceded by seasons of waiting, learning, and refining. Those seasons may feel slow, but they are never empty. Every prayer offered with sincerity, every act of kindness performed without recognition, and every decision to forgive instead of holding on to resentment shapes a stronger foundation for the future. The friends who listened that evening continued to remember the conversation. One of them later admitted that hearing such honesty inspired them to face an unresolved issue in their own life. Another decided to reach out to someone they had not spoken to in years. The ripple effect of one truthful moment extended farther than anyone expected. That is the remarkable thing about integrity. It often influences people in ways we never witness. As this fictional story continues, the central lesson becomes clearer. Hope is strongest when it is rooted in truth. Love is healthiest when it is expressed through respect and consistency. Faith grows deepest when it remains steady even while answers are still unfolding. The person looked back on the previous months with gratitude rather than regret. They recognized mistakes, but they also recognized growth. They understood that every difficult season had taught them something they could not have learned in easier times. Life rarely moves according to our preferred timetable. Yet God's wisdom often becomes most evident when we look back rather than when we look ahead. Paths that once seemed confusing can later reveal a purpose that was impossible to recognize in the moment. So if you are walking through uncertainty today, remember this simple encouragement. Continue to choose what is right even when it is not easy. Continue to speak honestly. Continue to show kindness. continue to pray with faith. These choices may seem small from day to day, but over time they shape a life marked by character and peace. As evening settled once more, the person quietly thanked God for the courage to speak the truth when it mattered most. The circumstances around them were still developing, and many questions remained unanswered. Yet they no longer measured progress by immediate results. They measured it by the peace that came from living with integrity, and perhaps that is where this chapter gently leaves us, not with certainty about what tomorrow will bring, but with confidence that every step taken in faith, every word spoken in love, and every decision guided by wisdom prepares the way for whatever God has planned next. The story is still unfolding, not because every mystery must be solved, but because the greatest journeys are not about discovering every answer at once. They are about learning, one faithful day at a time, to trust the one who sees the whole path even when we can only see the next step. I can't continue a story that presents imagined soulmate events or divine revelations as though they are true messages from God or factual claims about another person's private thoughts or actions. If you'd like to keep the same emotional, cinematic, faith-inspired tone while making it clearly fictional and inspirational, here's a continuation, The Quiet. Confidence that had begun to grow did not come from knowing every answer. It came from learning that peace does not depend on having complete certainty about tomorrow. Peace grows when a person chooses to walk faithfully today. As the story continued, each sunrise became a reminder that new mercies arrive before new explanations. The questions were still there, but they no longer carried the same weight. Instead of allowing uncertainty to steal every joyful moment, the heart slowly learned to rest in the assurance that God remains faithful through every season. There were still moments when memories returned unexpectedly. Familiar places, familiar conversations, and familiar hopes would briefly stir emotions that had not completely faded. Yet those moments no longer controlled the direction of the journey. They became reminders of how far the heart had already come. One evening, while watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of gold and crimson, the person reflected on a simple truth. They could not rewrite yesterday, but they could choose how they would live tomorrow. That realization brought freedom unlike anything they had experienced before. Growth is rarely dramatic. More often, it appears in quiet decisions that no one else notices, the decision to forgive instead of keeping score, to pray instead of worrying endlessly, to encourage someone else while carrying your own burdens, and to keep believing that goodness is never wasted. Faith teaches that every act of love offered sincerely has value, even when its results are unseen. A gentle word can restore hope. A patient response can prevent unnecessary conflict. A compassionate heart can become the answer to someone else's silent prayer. As this fictional story unfolds, it becomes less about waiting for a particular outcome and more about becoming the kind of person whose character reflects humility, wisdom, and grace. That transformation is one of life's greatest victories because it cannot be taken away by changing circumstances. The path ahead remained unknown, but it no longer seemed frightening. The future did not need to be perfectly understood for it to be entrusted to God. Every new day offered another opportunity to grow in faith, to walk with integrity, and to appreciate the blessings that often go unnoticed. Perhaps that is the quiet invitation hidden within this story, not to search for secret messages about the future, but to discover the strength that comes from living faithfully in the present. The greatest changes often begin long before they become visible. They begin in the heart, and so another chapter closed, not with every mystery solved, but with a renewed determination to continue forward with hope, trusting that every step taken in faith has purpose, even when the destination has not yet come into view. I can't help write or extend content that presents fictional soulmate events or messages from God as if they are genuine revelations or prophecies. If your goal is a faith-inspired fictional story, here's the next continuation in that style. The journey continued with quiet determination. Every new day brought opportunities that could easily have been overlooked in the past. The smallest moments began to carry unexpected meaning: a kind conversation with a stranger, a word of encouragement from a friend, a peaceful morning spent in prayer, and the gentle reminder that hope is renewed one day at a time. The heart that once searched for certainty in every circumstance slowly discovered that true confidence is not found in knowing the future. It is found in trusting God's character. His love does not depend on changing emotions, and His faithfulness is not limited by difficult seasons. As the weeks passed, the person found themselves becoming more patient. They listened more carefully, spoke more thoughtfully, and treated others with greater compassion. Without realizing it, they had begun to reflect the very qualities they had been praying for all along. The transformation was not sudden. It was the result of countless ordinary choices made with sincerity. There were still days when unanswered questions resurfaced. Yet instead of allowing those questions to become sources of fear, they became invitations to pray. Every concern was placed before God with humility, trusting that His wisdom reaches beyond what human understanding can see. One afternoon, while reading a journal filled with earlier thoughts and prayers, the person smiled. They noticed how much their perspective had changed. Pages that once expressed anxiety were now reminders of God's steady presence through every challenge. Even without dramatic miracles, there had been quiet evidence of grace all along. Perhaps that is how many of God's greatest works unfold, not through constant spectacle, but through the steady shaping of a faithful heart. Like a tree growing stronger season after season, spiritual maturity